Not sure how. Oh, it does seem brighter. It does. That's so interesting. I know. Do you want to turn your seat a little bit more and we can see each other? Yeah, let's just make it our own living room. Yeah. All right, good. And we'll wait till they come on board. Hi, everyone. I'm not sure if we're ready to begin, but we're all ready, and so I'm looking at our organizers. All right. Good afternoon, and welcome back from a lovely luncheon. I hope you had time to catch up with colleagues or to meet some new colleagues. My name is Kathleen Kienast. I am the Senior Gender Advisor here at the U.S. Institute of Peace. And it is my pleasure and honor to welcome you all this afternoon. We have a wonderful young and very energetic panel to discuss really looking at the future. But I wanted to begin with just a thought on some of the conversations from this morning, and the word invisible kept coming up, and how we make it visible. And I think of that as very much what I do every day as a gender advisor, is trying to make the invisible parts of our gendered identities, that is for men and women, visible so that we understand more of our opportunities for peace building in the world. And this afternoon, we're really going to look at the national level to the grassroots and how young Arab women are really looking at the future, how they are looking at their own leaderships, whether it's within a country or within a community, and how they are in fact networking and helping to empower one another. We're certainly going to talk about breaking barriers, as Representative-elect Ilhan Omar just spoke about, certainly breaking barriers in the National House of Representatives, and certainly here or in Minnesota. We're also going to be looking at assessing Arab and global initiatives focusing on women, and really making recommendations for the way forward. So I want to introduce you all to our three panelists and to welcome them. On my left is Marwa Al-Kairo. She is the manager of Partnership Development International Youth Foundation. She is here in the United States, where she has been working since 2012 with the foundation. Previously, she worked with the Carter Center as an elections consultant in Lebanon, Tunisia, and Egypt, as well as South Sudan. She received her Master's of Arts in Arab Study from Georgetown University School of Foreign Service, and is a regular speaker on a lot of different panels here in the States. We're going to come back in a few minutes. Our second panelist here this afternoon is Esma Ayari. She is with the U.S. Institute of Peace as a program specialist in Tunis. And thank you very much for stepping in for our panelist, Salih, who unfortunately was unable to make it this afternoon. Esma has long been engaged in issues around civil society. She was founder and president of Amina, an organization working on issues of gender and sexual harassment. And she was previously a facilitator with the International Republican Institute, IRI, Elections Mission. Welcome.
Thank you.
Our third panelist is Hajar Sharif. She's a co-founder of Libya Man Nabniha. I hope I said that pretty well, yeah? You'll correct it. She has been making a lot of ground lately as she was appointed by the Secretary General of the UN, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, as a member in the Advisory Committee for the Progress Study of Youth, Peace, and Security. You may be aware that there is a new Security Council Resolution 2250, like we have called it Women, Peace, and Security. This is called Youth, Peace, and Security. So we'll hear more from Hajar about this effort. But she will also talk about her life as a young woman amidst the Libyan revolution in 2011 and how her efforts on the ground help to look at the role and more directly in youth and peace building. So to get things started, I've asked each of them to take 5 minutes to actually talk about where they came from and when they wake up in the morning, what the issue is that's first on their mind and how their own background, they're very young people, but what was that kind of spark in their lives? And I'm going to start here with Mara.
Thank you, Kathleen, and it's a pleasure and an honor to be with everyone here today. Thank you for giving us the opportunity, USIP and the League of Arab States, to speak on such an important issue related to Arab women at such a critical time in our history, and especially in the Middle East and North Africa, with the situation that has befallen the region in the past several years. My name is Marwa. Marwa is a unique name that was given to me by my grandmother. My grandmother comes from the north of Iraq. My family comes from the north of Iraq, from a city called Mosul, which I think is not too unfamiliar to many of us today because of the current situation in Mosul. I was born and raised in the United States. I'm a complex hybrid of Iraqi, American, Arab, Muslim woman, and that identity has really shaped who I am, what I believe, what my passion, what my spark is in this life. I had the fortune to have a mother and a father who pushed us and wanted us to go to Iraq every year of our lives. So my school year was spent in the United States getting a wonderful education. And in the summers, it was in my grandparents' homes in the north of Iraq and Mosul. While I would go to Iraq and I would drive these crazy 12-hour drives between Jordan, Iraqi-Jordan borders, Iraq borders, go into Iraq, drive from Baghdad up north to Mosul, I saw this amazing nation during the 90s, which, as many of you remember, is when the sanctions were imposed. And I saw a lot of suffering, I saw a lot of difficulty, I saw a lot of potential that existed but was untapped because of the situation that was there. Those early days of my life are really what formulated why I wanted to go into a field that was linked to international relations, a field that would take me into the nonprofit sector so that I could help young people, people in Iraq, in the Middle East, and North Africa to maximize that untapped potential. From then, I decided to take on my bachelor's, my master's in the field of IR, in the field of Arab studies, and I tried everything from research to elections to consulting on various democracy programs. But really, at the end of the day, what I saw was the strongest was the power of youth and the potential of youth and what they are doing and what they can continue to be doing. So I focused very clearly on working in youth development, and which is why today I'm currently working in the International Youth Foundation, where we believe in the extraordinary power of young people to accomplish great things. Young women, young men, and I hope I can use some of that experience today to speak with all of you about the important issues around Arab women.
Thank you so much for getting us going and really opening the blinds, if you will, into how your own childhood began to help you figure out and choose what it is you do every day now. So thank you. Esma, tell us a little bit about your background and your work.
I was born in Tunis, and if I travel a lot around the region, the Arab region, but I always, when I go, I hear, well, Tunis, you have it good. And in part, I personally was affected by this propaganda that I believed it until it wasn't true. And I started seeing that it's the first thing in front of me that is hindering the change, because you cannot change when everyone is convinced that all is well, and this is specifically for women. I have 6 other sisters, so yeah, I have many siblings. Growing up with my sisters, the more I grew up, the more I know that my middle class family has protected me enough. The privileges I had, I wasn't protected because I was protected in the country. I was protected because I had something that backs me up, were the economic family privileges. And the more I grew up, the more I separate from those privileges, the more I am prone to what everyone else is prone to, violence mainly and discrimination. So that's when this was a transition from high school to college, where I was open and out there for everyone. And I figured what has protected me so far is no longer there, and it is the case for a large percentage of other girls. And this is when I wanted to not be affected by the propaganda and the publicity that we're good, we're fine, we're the most educated in the Arab world, we're the most free. And this is what the state has been working on to promote, because it serves the image and it serves the regime mainly and on the politics. But it's shutting down any other voice that says otherwise, and hence there weren't any changes happening, and I felt it personally. So right before the revolution in 2010, I decided to tackle one specific issue, which was sexual harassment in school settings. Initially, my idea was very broad. It was meant for everyone. It was answered to power dynamics between mainly school teachers and students in general. But the closer I get, the more, at least statistically and number-wise, I know it is a bigger issue. It is a woman issue. There are other gender dynamics is very much included. And that's when I started formulating more defined rhetorics, as opposed to I want to fight sexual harassment. I figured that being a woman is not that easy, and I had to join current efforts to tackle that. So that was a marking point of my life when I figured that things are bigger than they look. Problems are bigger than what I thought. And that's when I was confronted, mind you, this was 2010, so right before the revolution. The civil society formats were different. You had to have several permits and several licenses before you get your association to register. And right there, in all this process, the revolution happened. So what the organizations I looked up to, the people I wanted to join, I've long heard about big feminist organization that I wanted to be a part of. When the revolution happened, we all stopped for a second and we wanted to readdress, to re-look at things. They had the chance, and we had it too, but at some point we all lost contact, and the people I saw wanted to join, they don't represent me anymore, because they didn't acknowledge that there is something that happened and that can be seized, and it's a huge opportunity for everyone to reassess and rework, but they didn't do that. So we reached a point, I think, in 2011, 2012, where we have two activist communities, one that sees the other, which is the younger generation, as overly critical of their work, too radical and overly demanding, and one on the other hand, which is the younger, sees the older one as too submissive. They didn't reach further when they could, and they tell them what was enough for you is not necessarily enough now, and you need to acknowledge this point of time that things happened and things changed, and we all just to jump in on that moment and seize it. So in this respect, there was something very minor at the time. I think 2013, there was a Facebook group called Women and Letters, literally for women who write things, poems, be anything, and eventually it evolved into something called Collective Shamil. Shamil is a grassroots collective that is horizontally governed. We were radical, or where we objected to any form of structural organization, as we saw from what we inherited from older organizations, that we too organized, we end up being the institution of activism hinders activism. So we were the first representation of grassroots, and we do acknowledge the successes they left for us and what we learned from them. To keep it short. Sorry. So I advise you all to go on Shamil blog. That can tell you anything. Shamil has a two-liner definition. Says it's a group of Tunisian women who wanted a change, and it's free and it's open. You can see anything in that. But the more we grow up, and the more it's been 5 to 6 years since revolution, but we acknowledge the fact that scattered effort doesn't lead anywhere, and we want to join in forces, but there is this gap that we still need to bridge between.
Okay, well, we're going to come back to that gap and try to figure out if we have some common spaces here. Thank you so much, Esma. Hajar, you're also doing something called Extremely Together, about what you all can do to counter violent extremism. You have another group called Together We Built It. You've been busy. Tell us a little bit about your life day to day right now.
You know, I've been traveling for the past couple of months, attending meetings and conferences, and everyone is asking me this question. Please tell us your story.
I'm going to ask you to move your, yes, exactly.
Like this.
We can hear you. We don't want to lose any of your words. Thank you.
Yeah.
I don't think it works, so you have to bring it back.
Okay. Like this. Yeah. I'm trying to find the technical support. Well, what I was saying is that for the past couple of months.
Can you hear her?
Yeah?
Okay.
Should I hold it like this?
Yes.
For the past couple of months, I was traveling to different places, attending conferences and meetings, and mainly everyone is asking me this question. Please tell us your story. They don't know much about Libya, they don't know much about women in Libya, and let alone they don't know much about youth in Libya. However, me, myself, honestly, I'm tired of hearing my own words, and I'm tired of hearing my own story. Therefore, today, I want to share someone else's story. Today, I still have the privilege to talk with my voice, I still have the privilege to write, I still have the privilege to protest, I still have the privilege to be present here. A dear friend of mine from the east city of, from Benghazi, from the east of Libya, his name is Tawfiq Ben Saud. And for the Arabic speakers, you might understand already that this is a guy. And even though our topic here is about women's empowerment, yet I think it's really important for us ourselves to remember that women's issues are not women's issues. Gender equality is a society issue. Therefore, today I want to share his own story. When I met Tawfiq, I met him when he was 15 years old. That was in 2012. At that time, I was 19. And this is after the Libyan revolution. Since then, I worked with Tawfiq closely on issues related to women's rights in Libya, peace and security, empowering citizenship among youth, raising their awareness. However, in 2014, Tawfiq gave me a call. It was in the summer, and that time there was 2 huge armed conflicts taking place, one in Tripoli and the other one in Benghazi. And then he called me, he said, well, I think at the moment we need to get our voice out to the international community so they can really know how they can help us. And then he suggested that we can write a joint article together on peace and security. So he said, well, you take the part on the role of women, and I will write about the role of youth. And I remember myself telling him at that time, I said, well, are you serious? What do you think this will add? And in the background, I'm hearing the bombs, I'm hearing the clashes, and then for me, I was, even though that I'm an activist and I'm the one who's promoting for this, yet there was this moment where I just gave up on that. And then he said, well, civic work should never stop. Only the war should stop. These were words of like a guy who's 18 years old. 3 days afterwards, Tawfiq was assassinated by an armed man. Until this moment, we don't know who. Well, for us, I won't say we don't know why, because it's so obvious why. A couple of days ago, I was reading his blog, and then I came across what he wrote personally before he was assassinated. He said, I'm Tawfiq bin Saud, I'm 18 years old. Well, he wasn't even 18 years old. He was just saying that he was 18 because everyone considered him too young. I'm a student at Benghazi University, law faculty. I'm working so hard to be a change maker. This is how I see myself in 10 to 20 years. He wrote this the year he died. This is how I see myself in 10 to 20 years. This is my goal in life. I'm also very interested in youth rights and decision making. I believe that change in my country will be led by youth. So I'm looking forward to create the first fully youth government. I'm talking about a government led by youth. This is big, isn't it? Last year, 2015, the Security Council adopted the 2250 resolution, which is a resolution that literally can make Tawfiq's dream come true. The resolution basically talks about youth participation in the political process, youth participation in the peace-building process. It's very wide and concrete that it tackles our current issues at the moment. The resolution, and I think we should all be proud of, it was led by Jordan. Before the resolution was adopted, I joined a group of international organizations, mainly youth-led groups, who pushed the security, who was advocating for the Security Council to adopt 2250 resolution. So the biggest asset about 2250 resolution, that it's not just a resolution from the Security Council. It was youth that demanded the Security Council to recognize the role of youth in peace building with their own language. Therefore, today, as Jordan made the lead for this resolution to be adopted, I pledge on all Arab member states who are present here, please support this agenda. Because as was mentioned earlier, Arab, and in particular Muslim youth, are being stigmatized. We're being stigmatized as terrorists, extremists. If we are lucky enough that we don't yet look terrorists, then we will be identified as potential extremists or potential terrorists. And then I always get the question, well, do you feel safe in Libya? And, well, the honest answer, I would say no. However, I don't feel safe anywhere, to be honest. I don't feel safe when I'm passing through a security checkpoint at the airport and seeing those huge men and women holding weapons. I don't feel safe when I'm going around anyone who's holding a weapon, and that's the reason why I don't feel safe in Libya. It's not because of the Libyan society, it's because something external, it's because the weapons that are existing there. You mentioned that, well, I do have contributions with Extremely Together. It's an initiative that led by the former Secretary General of the UN, Mr. Kofi Annan, to empower the role of youth in countering violent extremism and peace building. In August, I was appointed by the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon to join the advisory group on 20-15. And I can tell you, accomplishing this at the age of 24 is really good. It feels so good. However, being in that loop, and then today, being brought here to this stage by the Libyan embassy, being supported by my own people by far, and I'm not saying this to be political correct, I'm saying this from the heart, being supported by men and women from my own country, this is what we need as Arab youth. We do have the international community who keeps supporting us, and then they keep supporting different groups from different regions. However, it means a lot. And this is not just, a spirit talk, an inspiring talk. No. It really means a lot to have our efforts recognized by our own people. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for that beginning, and I think that really kicks off a common thread of youth in transition. Each of you are in some sort of transitional country, identity, transitional in terms of generations. You talked about Asma. Let's talk about that a little bit. And I'm going to suggest that this is a theme that intersects with gender. And so I'm going to ask you each just, again, to kind of give me the brightest spots that you see going on right now to help empower and articulate this vision of young people, men and women, for the future. Madwa.
Great. Thank you. I guess I'm very fortunate that at my work, every single day, we hear stories that are very similar to my colleagues who are sitting to the left of me, who are inspiring, amazing, young Arab women and men who are doing monumental things to change their communities, their countries, their nations for the better. When I see that, and when I hear that, and when we witness that, and we program that, and we write proposals for it, every single day, our hope and confidence increases. We have a program called Youth Action Net. I encourage my colleagues to the left of me to apply to this program because it is a network of 1,400 young men and women from all over the world, including the Middle East and North Africa, who are doing monumental changes in their communities, whether it's through social enterprise, whether it's through gender equality projects, whether it's through community engagement projects, etc., etc. It's a long roster of things that they're doing. And what you see when you meet them, when you speak with them, when you hear their stories, is that there are current projects already happening. So many times when we talk about this issue, it's a futuristic issue, but it is not a futuristic issue. It's one, the issue of the role of women and what they have been doing universally has always existed. They are doing, they have been doing, they will be doing, sometimes to put spotlight on it. And I believe the representative said this, her critique of the word empowerment is one that I share. They are empowered already. There is no reason to continuously go on to empowerment and to focus on this term. And I think that's what we see, and that's what we're going to continue to be seeing.
So
and I think
us one of those stories out of 14.
Definitely.
Give us the concrete idea.
Definitely. We have, there's two that we like. There's three, actually. I'll go quickly. One, her name is Lina Khalifa. She's from Jordan. She started an organization called She Fighter. She Fighter is the first martial arts studio for women in Jordan and in the Middle East. Through that, she wants to teach women self-confidence, self-defense, and how to basically fend for themselves in their communities. The second one is Rihab. She's from Egypt. She does Catherine Exists. Catherine Exists basically works in a protectorate in South Sinai, where she tries to bring together the Bedouin community in order to restore their community, to bring back its identity, to bring back what they can contribute and have contributed to their communities. And then based on what you just said, which is such a critical point, is we can never separate the critical role of men in all of this. We have Ayash Shalal from the north of Iraq living in Erbil. He is a mixed breed himself of being Syrian and Kurdish and Iraqi and everything. He was a refugee most of his life. He is part of an organization and leads an organization and speaks on its behalf, which is all about gender equality. So a part of the voice of speaking on behalf of Arab women is the integrated voice of the entire community coming together, men and women alike, and believing in that future and acknowledging what already exists.
Great, that really gives us some ideas to see how they're being developed every day in the region. Asma, can you also give us some of the work that you're doing in Tunisia?
It's hard when you look for success stories. That are a lot, but also, unless we're asked, we always forget. So when we hear of this, we know that we're not the only people. People try and people have succeeded, and we'll all keep on succeeding. I second everything you said, particularly about empowerment. It's not because we're already empowered. It's because we don't need someone to come and empower you. It's an action that comes from within. So I recall two people that when I look up to them, I see whatever I will do after can be done, and it bears success, and that success is possible, and recognition is also possible. I think in Tunisia, it's not we don't have the room for youth and women to actually do something. It's because they fear this invisibility and this recognition not paying off afterwards. But I think the civil society has reached a point, thankfully, where recognition is not the aim in itself, but they believe in the impact their initiatives have been producing so far, and slowly but surely they are seeing something that can channel eventually into something long-term and sustainable, and that in itself is being mainstreamed around activist circles, and it serves for this. Two bright stories. I want to mention my Iraqi Kurdish friend Amir Ashur. I didn't mention Tunisian because Amir is a success story. I heard about it while I'm still in Tunis, before I actually met him. Unfortunately, we have to always meet in different countries. His success was in Iraq, and it jeopardized his life there. He had to leave, but the impact is still in Slimania, Iraq in particular. And I also recall Khouloud Mahdawi, who's, unfortunately, I have to say, she also had to travel and live in France. She's Tunisian, but she was the founder of the first young feminist art festival in Tunis that was on an extremely low budget last year, but it got so much endorsement when it happened in a very closed club center that this May it had its second edition, and it was international, the first international feminist festival. That it was the first space for women artists to have. They don't have to pay fee. They don't have to send anything. They just come and display their art, and it kind of moved art and women voices from what we are used to, which is artisanal and crafts. Usually in Tunis, if you see women, you think these women take a certain grant to produce something artisanal, so they kind of restrict women's artistic powers. So this festival is also a huge success story for a group of young women who've done it.
Sounds like it's
it is great.
A real example of making their concerns and ideas very visible. And
it's possible. And those things when we had, because I know I'm sure you share this, but at some point we had a moment of frustration. You think that you're fighting everyone else and fighting everything else as nothing is accomplished. When you take a moment and you think of this, and I'm pretty sure I will remember the story of your friend for a while. When you remember these things, it gives you hope and it gives you stamina to go on.
Well, stories definitely are what bind us, and what you so well just said gives us the memory of, and often the inspiration. Hajar, who inspires you? We heard about your friend, and who else inspires you?
Well, of course, in the top list of mine, it's always him, Tawfiq. However, I won't go through names, but I would say the young women in my organization, and again, I'm 24, and I still consider myself the older generation in the organization. We have, no, seriously, we have young women who are 18 and 17. And you know, when it comes to topics such as peace and security, it always sounds abstract. It always sounds something that it's not relevant to the society. How can you be living in an armed conflict country and then you would say, well, women don't know anything about peace and security, or youth don't know anything about peace and security? Earlier, the Security Council Resolution 1325 was mentioned quite a lot. And I don't know how many of you have read the text of the resolution. However, we have 3 of our members who are 17 years old. When they first joined us, and they knew already that we are talking about something that's called 1325 with the Security Council, what they did, they literally sat and they read the text, and most ironically is that they interpreted it and translated it to their own language. And afterwards they came up to us and they said, well, this is how we see women, peace and security in Libya. And believe it or not, those young women were talking about women's participation in the peace negotiations, women's participation in the security sector reform, which is, again, even if you ask an old man anywhere what is the security sector reform, most probably they won't have any idea about it. So as an example, when I see those young women and men, when I see that they are doing an effort to actually empower themselves, even though that they already know that they have the capacity, empower themselves to have the capacity to speak the language that, for example, the international community speak, or speak the language of peace and security. Yeah.
Yeah, I also want to open it up if you want to ask each other questions or comment. And I'm going to now ask you if there's anything you would like to share or ask your fellow panelists.
Certainly. I think one thing that strikes me is after when the revolutions, and sometimes I do this when I say revolutions because I worry about what ensued afterwards. And I know we're from Iraq, we always ask ourselves what was better, the time of Saddam or the time that we're enduring right now. And people in Iraq and Iraqis will have all sorts of opinions and ideas and discussions. I probably won't state my own right now, and please, of course, if you're not comfortable, I want to ask now, in light of what has happened in Tunisia, in Libya, where do you think the direction is going for young people? And what do you see, what hope or no hope, for example, do you see in the direction of young Tunisians, young Libyans? I was recently in Tunisia. I saw in front of the Ministry of Labor a lot of young people from Qasreen, from Sidi Bouzid, etc., sleeping in front of the ministry, and it left me feeling a little bit confused. So I want to ask you your perspectives.
Just to go back to the what's better before or after, it's a question that naively I tried to answer like when it first happened, and I think as I grow up, I think it's the wrong question to ask. The thing is that you just acknowledge that something happened, be it revolution or not. There is something that stopped to that ended an era and started a new one that does not need a reflection which one is better. Especially when we witnessed this right at the threshold of our lives. We witnessed this when we just got into college. So at least personally and my generation, I think it's futile to be stuck in comparison. I think we live it. We all live it in our house. I hear my parents all the time. They have strong opinions, but we have to understand them also. But it's a question I don't want to dwell on. It's just something happened, and everyone should acknowledge that it happened, regardless of what it may be called, and it has implications, good and bad. At least if it has one thing that we can say, it has it has opened for options, and that is not you cannot go back from there. The way we see it, how the formats, the procedures, the policies, all to be defined, yes, but it marked a point where something allowed for more options, and it's on everyone else now to to think how to make the most of it. What's the direction for youth in Tunisia? I think it's in their hands, and they get to decide. And I'm not usually a very optimistic person, but on this point I am. I tend to get on the cynicism side, but because I've seen a lot of signs that tell me there are possibilities, there are options, and it's in our hands.
Well, this is a really valid question, and I think everyone is asking themselves this question. But if we think of what is the difference between a revolution and a military coup, a revolution is not something that is just happens or is just there. What is the revolution? It's literally people. It's people like Tawfiq. It's people like many as him, and then doubting that. Sometimes it really happens, even on a personal level, when I think that, well, I could have met him in another setting and he could have been alive right now, and maybe at university we were both studying law. But then when I look at those people who really sacrificed their lives, sometimes it's really too late, or we don't have like the full say on that. In 2014, I volunteered to work with the elections committee for the Constitution drafting assembly elections, monitoring the elections. And then one of the families, when they came and they gave their votes, they brought a cake with them. And on the top of the cake, they wrote, "Thank you," from our marcher. And apparently this is a family who lost their son. And imagine, like, their personal loss, and yet they managed to overcome their own personal feelings and their own personal loss for the bigger image. When I get asked this question, or when I think of it myself, I just remind myself that, well, the revolution happened for the long term. It didn't happen just in 2011 or to make a change in the short term. That's why I try to keep myself, well, hopeful as much as possible that yet those are not the outcomes, those are the obstacles of any revolution that can happen. I mean, looking at the history, what happened in Libya afterwards, these security struggles, it happened everywhere. So I just keep reminding myself that, well, this is not the outcomes of the revolutions. These are just, hopefully, temporary obstacles that will be overcome in the future. Yeah.
It's a great set of questions, and I'm going to turn it back to you before we open it to the audience. If you have any questions of your fellow panelists.
Well, I would love to chat later on and get a deeper.
Haja, you have something?
I would want to hear a personal story of something that it was really the breaking point when it comes to your own rights as a woman. Something maybe when you were a child, something most recent, anything like that.
Would you be willing to begin?
Oh, well, that's why I asked the question, so I won't answer it myself.
But we try not to cry. So, I started by saying, but maybe not giving too much detail, about traveling to Iraq every year of my life. And I will say that those were probably the best memories of my life, and ones that I don't think I could ever replace in my heart again. And when I see now what's happening in Mosul, and what could potentially happen in Mosul, and the potential demise of that nation, of that city, that provokes, in a way, good memories of my childhood, of my family, of my grandfather's homes. But at the same time, I get scared. It is probably the only thing, listening to you gives me hope. Going to my work and hearing the stories of young Arabs like yourselves doing amazing things gives me hope. But for some reason, when I look at Iraq and Mosul, it's maybe the one thing that does not give me hope. And I remember in 2004, June 19, 2004, I went to Iraq like any other summer. And it was my dad, Baba, my dad's first time to go after 28 years of not going that whole entire time. And rather than celebrating, we ended up witnessing the death of my aunt and my uncle. And until this day, I get probably nightmares just seeing the blood splattered, seeing their bodies on the floor, and knowing that that's not the story of only my family, but of thousands of families and hundreds of thousands of families in Iraq and in the region. So to me, in a way, it's a story that moves me, that keeps me going every single day, but in a way, it's a story that scares me because I don't know what's going to happen. And it's one that conflicts me, and I'm saying out loud that it conflicts me as well. So there's hope, but I feel that we have to continue working for that, and we have to all together, collectively, see our narrative as one narrative, a narrative that wants change, that wants good, that wants commonality, that wants just universal goodness to be happening. And when I think of that, I think, okay, we're going in the right direction.
I always find it hard to answer a question after such a moving statement. But if I would say something that touched me as a woman and it kind of fired or inspired everything I do now, is that there was an organization, the most prominent feminist organization in Tunis, struck me with its elitism and exclusion, that I know by law, by their internal law, that if I joined, I will be accepted. If my mom did, she won't. For the simple reason they had certain criteria for what women they think are eligible to be part of their work, and this is the most prominent feminist organization. And later on, when my sisters also started wearing hijabs, I also know they couldn't join in as well. So I believed in what they did, but also I was torn apart between I can be working for women from the same organization that doesn't acknowledge my mom and my own sister's right to be involved. Mind you, they do accept them as victims, for example, of domestic violence. They just will not they will never make it to the board. They will never be included or engaged in their decision making. So the board is strictly designed for a certain type of women that is not inclusive of my mom or my sisters. So that sort of fueled my passion for inclusion and intersectionality and all this, that we wanted an alternative. And every now and then, whenever I attend something, I feel a little proud when we talk big words and everything, but I also feel a little embarrassed and touched aside, because I know whatever I do is separate and is not translatable in my own household. And that always gets me where it's sort of my meter, or the way I measure are the things I'm doing are right or not. Is this for everyone or it's not? Because I still, even though I come from this family, I still enjoy a lot more privileges than my sister do. So whenever I do something that is my scale, I remember, is this for them too? And when it's that affects all my efforts, and it makes me better judge things.
Thank you, Asma.
Well, I don't want to sound like the grumpy person trying to get out all the sad stories, but I have a sister. She's 13 years old. Currently, she's in the UK. And one day, well, after the American elections, and we know all what happened, I don't need to reflect on that. But when she came back the second day from school, she said, well, our teacher said that this is the end of the world. And me and my mom, even that we think it might be, but we were like, no, that's not true. It's not as simple as this. And she started talking about the nuclear weapon, and she was like, believe it, it's only 4 minutes until he just blows us up. So then my mom was telling her, well, her name is Susie. My mom was telling her, well, Susie, this is history. This is what happens. Like, if you look at Europe, if you look at the US in itself, well, it happens. And then after a couple of years, people will get progressed again, etc. And then my sister was like, I know it's normal in the history, but I just don't want to live it. And she was absolutely right when she said, like, I just don't want to live it. It doesn't mean that it happened before, it needs to happen again. So for this was like a couple of weeks ago, but yet such a thing, it just makes me feel responsible that, well, in the long term, we still actually need to continue our work. Yeah.
Every day.
Every day.
Everybody in our families and this audience as well. And now I would like to turn to the audience. These three young, amazing women have been very forthcoming about their lives, their struggles, and their hopes and their fears. I would like to open up the floor now, and I'm going to also take about 3 questions, which gives the panelists a little time to think about it. I see one hand here, and then I'll go to this side. Is there a hand on this side? Right down here, just so we're ready. And then is there another person? Okay, and then you'll be number 3. Could you stand and tell us who you are? Oh, they're up here all by themselves. And tell us who you are, and if you could just kind of get your point.
Sure. My name is Mara Kronenfeld, and I have the good fortune of working with Marwa at International Youth Foundation. And what I want to ask is maybe perhaps slightly controversial, so I'll say that in advance, which is Marwa and I and our colleagues at IYF often have discussions about this whole terminology, especially sitting here at the United States Institute of Peace, of countering violent extremism. And we find this acronym, as we all know it now, as CVE, as difficult and hard to swallow sometimes, even saying these words, especially at IYF, where, as Marwa said, we see youth as assets, and as the youth bulge as a dividend that's going to help the future if we cultivate young minds and young talents. And I think there's probably a better way we can talk about such issues that don't make it about extremism, which in turn make it about religion, which in turn make it prejudicial against Islam. There are all sorts of religions where extremism exists. But when we talk about CVE, we're talking about one religion usually. So I'm just curious for your thoughts on if you've had the same feelings, if there's any sort of sense in which you would like to complicate that as well, or if that's just on our perch here in the US, being hypercritical of our own development sector.
Great, thank you for that question. And it's really important to hear what our colleagues, not only how they synthesize that, but what kind of advice they might give us in the international relations field. I'm going to go, though, to our next audience member, if you would stand, and I'll give them a little time to think about it.
My name is Sahar Kamis. I'm a professor in the Department of Communication at the University of Maryland. First of all, thank you all so much. I'm so proud of every and each one of you. I think you set excellent role models for Arab women, young Arab women. And of course, there were all of these great moments when women were active, very much so in the Arab Spring, like you all mentioned. Great work has been done, and much more work still has to be done. And we saw what happened in terms of the way that, democracy has been derailed in many of the quote-unquote post-Arab Spring countries. Politically, there have been so many obstacles. But what I want you to specifically address what really went wrong when it comes to women's movements. Like you mentioned something about the lack of sufficient inclusion, for example. What other gaps or caveats should have been really looked at more carefully in terms of evaluating the role of Arab women and Arab women's movements, and what could have been done differently to reach a better and more effective outcome? Thank you.
Great, thank you so much for that question. I can't wait to hear the answers to that as well. It's important, your view and your analysis on this. I know there was one last hand up here. Thank you so much. The mic is coming to you.
Thank you very much. Very dynamic. We are very proud of all of you. I am Amal David, and I am with Arab America Media. And we Arab women have achieved so much in this country. Many of us are very professional and very productive in this society. And it aches my heart that we talk and we write articles, and we make our voices heard whenever possible, but it's still not making a dent. What can be done? I need your suggestion. What can be done to make a huge difference in this country? Because every time we tune into mainstream media, all what we hear is negative aspects of Arab women. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that great question. You have 3 very serious questions in front of you. You don't have to answer all of them. The first one was really looking at this idea that, and the language, the framing of countering violent extremism, and what that does or does not do for youth and our future in this region. The second question is very simply, what went wrong with the women's movement in this region? And I would add, did something go right? And then the third question is, how is it after this long we're not making a dent? And from your youthful perspectives as young women, what can be done? Who would like to begin?
I can go with the CVE question. I absolutely agree with you. And I use countering violent extremism myself, even though if you would ask me what is countering violent extremism, I would say, well, it's peace building. And in the international community, the discourse of countering violent extremism doesn't only always refer to building peace, establishing security. However, I was in this conflicted situation before, and not only with the term countering violent extremism, but with a couple of other terms. And then I get to the conclusion that we need to be realistic. The ones who coming up with those terminologies are the ones who have the resources, the political resources, the financial resources, the military resources. If we don't get into that discourse and try to change it ourselves, then as long as there would be funding and money, there would be someone else who will just try to fit on the criteria that they are using. However, it doesn't mean that we cannot challenge it. Me, myself, well, you mentioned I'm with the Kofi Annan Foundation on Extremely Together, and the reason why it has been called Extremely Together, it's because we really wanted to use a word that is used negatively. And then we said, okay, let's just say extremely together, because if extreme means something negative, then, well, here's 10 people who are working on different fields. I'm working on promoting peace building through women's participation in youth. Other people, like a colleague of mine from Somalia, she's working on disarmament and rehabilitation. And even though, again, that the discourse is really strongly led by, well, the bottom line, how, you know, the silliest question, and pardon my French, is that when they ask us, how can you identify a potential extremist? And I just feel that a potential extremist looks like me. Because if you want to know how a potential extremist looks now, yes, it's a young person from the Arab region, Muslim, and especially if it was a woman, then wearing a headscarf. And even though I'm the one who's walking around saying that I'm working on countering violent extremism, I still get stigmatized myself, especially at embassies and when I'm asking for visas. I get asked questions such as, are you with an armed group? And I say, well, no, what? Like, is there anything on me that might show that I joined an armed group? Have you served in the military before? And I can just see that those are questions, indirect questions, just to know that if I have any affiliation to an extremist group. So I completely agree with you. However, I was in that conflicted situation before. I still believe that as long as the term is there, then we need to use that. We need to identify what countering violent extremism is about. And I've been in meetings with politicians from the EU and the US and everyone who's now so obsessed with CVE, as they call it. And if you would ask them, please identify it in one sentence, they won't be able to do so because no one knows. But on the other hand, I think there is an opportunity, as long as there is a vacancy that they don't know what it actually means, then maybe it's an opportunity for us to interfere and give other solutions. Yeah.
Thank you, Hajar.
I mean, Mara noted that we work together, so we are, I mean, in the field of youth development, when we look at young people, we look at them as positive change agents. So the word CVE is very problematic for us, of course, on a philosophical level, because it is mean, it is not accurate, it has a lot of assumptions and misperceptions that go along with it as baggage and that need to be unpacked before policies and programs are designed around it, because it could actually lead to more pain, it could actually lead to more complexities than it could actually lead to solving. And then on a second level, when we do work with young people, if you go to a young person and try to say to them, you are a potential terrorist, let us train you and let us put you in a job so that you don't, go do something, that is never a way to treat people in positively training them, bringing them up, having them be strong, positive citizens. If you look at them from the positive perspective, not even look at them, genuinely believe internally of their positive potential, that's where actual good movements and changes can be made for these young people.
Do you want to talk about what went wrong with the women's movement, any of you?
Yes.
Okay.
Just to finish up on the terminology and linguistics of it, the term gender translates into نوع الاجتماعي in Arabic, and for 80% safely, no one will know what that means. So it's directly linked to our activism, where not only on a linguistic level, we have been translating everything the way we take it. And I will say something personal. I am writing my thesis on political correctness in translation of subtitles, of movie subtitles, on gender, sexuality, and race and religion, if I could fit it in a chapter. So this has showed me that if I write my thesis in English, it will be longer than if I write it in Arabic, because we have 10 years difference of what we call political correctness. And that tells you everything. Everything that is wrong with our activism is that at some point we acknowledge the need that we want something done, and we start referencing, reaching out, outsourcing references that we lacked and that we didn't have. In a way, we ended up translating the references and thus the actions, and that created, that shook the activism ground and made people not sure what they did. That is also linked to funding, because we get the funding from EU and US mainly, and the funder states their term assuming that people understand the thing. So in Tunis you see hype. What is the theme, the trending theme? Is it a gender? Is it what the money is going to now? So it's gender, and they adopt the terminology, they adopt the fixed definitions, and that reflects on our activism afterwards. And I don't blame them, I understand, but this circle must be broken. That is added to the fact that even local organizations that don't necessarily, they're not a result of this funding terminology conflict, but they are a result of lack of collaboration, of communication in this gender gap, because we want to make sure to incorporate the revolution as an event within our new thinking. It's not included yet. You have people who think they can continue on doing, and they still have the regime as an entity, as opposed to other people who do not acknowledge the regime. We had times where we didn't even have a government, and people, the older generation had frameworks. We don't have frameworks, so that affects. So you have like certain multiple groups doing different things that are somehow the same, but in different places and in different ways, and that is that affects the impact, that affects the result. So that is something what's wrong with our gender work.
I like this term outsourcing.
Yeah,
I think that's going to be something that in our analysis.
I would just finish a refer. There is one study that I'm I've read that was happened in Beirut. Unfortunately, I haven't seen anything like it. I've seen things, but not on that scale, between feminist movements and women-based activism between two different generations organization, and I would be happy to share so everyone can read afterwards.
Thanks, Esma. Hajar, you have the last word of this panel, and we're going to wrap it up.
Yeah,
How do we make a dent?
I will combine the terminology problem with what went wrong.
Okay.
I believe that when it comes to gender, or when it comes to development, or when it comes to peace and security, there is also the fact that it's not just there. Sometimes it's structured, and we do need the science. And even those terminologies, they sometimes come out of studies, social studies that the institutions conduct, etc. The barrier, there is the problem of the language barrier between those who are working, let's say, in the development sector and those local, even organizations, not only grassroots. However, I think there can be a solution, as in terms of civil society organizations who have the capacity to understand these terminologies and then translate it to what doesn't mean in the local community. Because there's also the fact that, well, gender equality, peace and security, development, these are universal matters, these are universal topics, and it means different things in different places. That's why we need a common language that can be afterwards interpreted on the local community. I've mentioned we've been working with 1325 for almost 5 years now. And what we established a network called 1325 Network in Libya, where we gather civil society organizations from different cities, and we were delivering training for women activists, raising their awareness on what is 1325. And the reason for that, it's not because it's a nice number, it's just because, well, there is this framework out there that structures the topic of women, peace and security. However, a week ago, now we are conducting research on what it's literally called Libyan's Women Perspective on Peace and Security. And what we did, we created a quiz. We called it Quick Questions. And they are a set of MCQ questions. And it talks about purely peace and security, but it also makes it valid to the local community. So very briefly, an example of that was that, well, this is one of the questions. Imagine yourself going through a security checkpoint and then you will get kidnapped. What would you do? Would you post it on Facebook? Will you take a selfie with the kidnappers? Or no, I'm smarter than that. I will do this and this and that. And even though that at the beginning, and there were another 9 questions, at the beginning we really didn't know how this will work out. Within 2 days, more than 1,000 women took that online quiz. However, on the other hand, we were criticized by some women's rights activists in Libya saying that, but this is too simple. You can't make it this simple. If they don't understand it, then we need to work on making them understand it. And I think if a problem is a society issue, and if women or any sort of groups within the society, if they don't understand it, then it's our problem, then our language is not valid. But it doesn't, I don't agree that, well, we need to change the discourse of this language on the international level, for an example. Yeah.
Well, you have a final comment?
I just wanted to comment on Ms. Emel David's question on Arab American women. It's an honor to meet you. I know very well how much you do for the Arab American community and women in the United States, so thank you. It's a critical one, but I think right now, Ms. Emel David, is the time for us to seize the opportunity to join a universal movement in the United States, worldwide, but first and foremost at home in the United States, to come together as women together, because we have just finished an election that where women were unfortunately not in the positive light of things, with a new administration that is going to test us on many levels. So whether it's Arab women or Black women or Latina women or any other woman, Muslim, Jewish, Christian women, we're going to have to somehow come together. And I think see how we can address these issues. I think women's issues are universal issues. I think they're contextualized. They become region-specific based on our own cultures. But at the end of the day, at the basic level, we're all pretty much the same. And I think there are movements happening now. There's I don't know if I can say this publicly, but I will. There is a protest the day after the inauguration of women coming together to march in DC for women's rights. And I think if we all join that together and be a part of that one voice, we'll start seeing significant differences for all of us, for all women. Thank you.
Just a final word. I personally, in my context, I haven't lived in other places than Tunis, but I think we don't see the dents that we're doing, the good dents, because when people are trying to camouflage your problems, they will not tell you your successes, because it will mean it's a recognition of the problem. This is what I see in my community. They wouldn't say something good happened because it would tell them that something was bad. And so in their endeavors of hiding what was bad, they also will hide what was good, and that goes for mainstream media. If they don't publicly say women have been beaten and there is domestic violence, they wouldn't say that there is a change of percentage or something, and that's only my opinion.
Well, I'm going to ask the audience to join me in thanking these very courageous, articulate, and thinkers of the future. Thank you. So would you like to say something?
Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you very much, and thank you for young ladies who attended today and accepting my invitation. I'm Ambassador Salah Sarhan of Arab League, and I really appreciate your coming today. And we heard your experience. It's a very successful one. We are proud of you. My advice to you: just keep on and keep your say loudly, and be patient. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You can take them off over there. And as our panelists leave, we have two final speakers this afternoon, and I'd like to introduce you to the first one.